with trains or kings. The stranger the need, the greater the grief of girls who are there to play. But sin is like grief, the greater the need, the greater the price to pay. For love, money, to her it's just worth for pay. For love, money, to have it thrown away.
Hi, I'm Doug Gibson and Steve Stones, and at Plan 9 Crunch, we're looking at Andy Milligan's Torture Dungeon, which was his 1970 film that was his Shakespearean drama for 42nd Street. It talked about the Duke of Norwich, who was his Richard III, who would go through his entire dysfunctional, sleazy, incestuous family of royals and murder his way to the top. This is the box that came out from Midnight Video in the old-fashioned clamshells, and there's Steve's painting of Torture Dungeon. Now, this is one of our favorite movies, partially because it took us a long time to find it. Now you can find it pretty more easily, but 5-6 years ago, this was a hot commodity. And we love this film. Jeremy Brooks plays the Duke of Norwich, who's one of Milligan's most, sadistic, deranged, demented, bad guys he ever had. He calls himself a trisexual. Maybe Steve can explain why.
I don't know that I can explain why, but I can talk a little bit about the film and tell you why this is one of my favorites. I think first I want to note that in this film, when you watch the credits at the beginning, it indicates that Hal Borschke's brother was responsible for writing the screenplay with Andy Milligan. And what I always find very fascinating about this film is that it has some of the trademark Milligan characteristics. For example, in many of the scenes, you see lots of strange drapery and cloth, different fabrics that try to hide different parts of the environment, which is a Milligan trademark. Milligan also uses the so-called swirl camera technique. For example, there's an opening sequence where one of the dukes is being decapitated, and you see the camera do a swirl motion after the head's being cut off the body, which is, a typical Milligan characteristic that you would find in many of his films. Milligan also likes to use impalement scenes in his films, which is a recurring theme in this film, and also the ghastly ones in Carnage. So, he likes to repeat some of his typical themes and camera techniques, which I think is, pretty common with any artist. They have certain stylistic traits, and you can recognize many of those in this film. Doug has some other comments that he wants to make about Torture Dungeon as well.
And I will tell you about the trisexual reference also. Milligan made films for $10,000 to $15,000 for a notoriously penny-pinching producer named William Mishkin, and he shot this film in Staten Island. And for extras and maybe people with very small roles, he would just recruit locals from the community or even people he picked up on 42nd Street for sex. So Milligan was pretty much in the gutter for making these movies, but he was so unique and so interesting. He'd create his own sloppy, dysfunctional, demented version of classic literature. Now, getting back to the trisexual one, our bad guy in the movie, the Duke of Norwich, his wife walks in on him having an affair, having sex with a hunchback, believe it or not. And the wife naturally protests about this and is upset. He goes, well, listen, I'm not homosexual, I'm not heterosexual, or I'm not asexual. I am trisexual. I will try anything. Now, there's several stock Milligan actors in this movie. Susan Cassidy, who's very uninhibited. You see her running around in dresses with her cleavage bursting out. She's naked in several scenes. She plays Heather McGregor, who's the common woman who is being married to an imbecilic prince, halfway. Yeah, his name played by Hal Borski, right? Yeah, and Also, Maggie Rogers, who you can see right here, and also in Steve's thing, it's a disfigured woman. She is a sympathetic character who eventually plays an important role at the end. But she was a stock character also at Milligan, who was best known for playing a very evil, demented matriarch in an earlier Milligan film called Seeds, or Seeds of Evil. Milligan was very good at showing dysfunction, showing the downside of life. Also, who's the guy who's in
Neil
the Man
Flanagan.
Neil Flanagan plays a royal also. Now, this is one of the movies, Torture Dungeon, like I said, made in 1970 for about $15,000, and it was made in the era of Milligan's gore movies like Bloodthirsty Butchers, although some were made in England. Also, The Rats Are Coming, The Werewolves Are Here, which was filmed both in the U.S. and England. What are some other movies he had? He had
The Ghastly Ones.
The Ghastly Ones. That's a very famous one. That's remained in print too. A lot of Milligan's
The
films.
Body Beneath.
The Body Beneath. That's all his heyday in the early 70s, where he'd use, as Steve would point out, garish costumes, dime novel lyrics, and also dialogue. But he always based it on something that was very flamboyant or very historical. Milligan made these really, really big period pieces that cried out for large budgets, but he made them for virtually nothing.
And in 16 millimeter too. It should be noted that when Milligan made these films, he made them in 16 millimeter. So when they played in various grindhouse theaters in New York on 42nd Street, I've heard accounts of patrons saying that they were almost unwatchable because the grain on the film was so, obnoxious on the screen for being shot in 16 millimeter that they were almost impossible to watch. And this is something that Frank Henenlotter points out if you listen to the audio commentary for The Body Beneath, which is another Milligan film. He talks about seeing these films up on 42nd Street and how grainy they were up on the big screen because they were shot in 16 millimeter.
Very good. These films played in the heart of 42nd Street in the dingiest theaters. Milligan was not shy about putting sex and nudity in his films, but they really weren't very erotic. He had a certain, I want to say, down style of filmmaking where, as dysfunctional and as pessimistic it could be, he would make it. But once again, this is actually Shakespearean. It's Andy Milligan's take on Richard III, and it's quite ambitious for a $13,000 movie. And we're glad it's still around. You can find it a little more easier than in the past. And that's all I have to say.
My concluding comment is, if there's one thing I can say about Milligan to sum up many of his films, is that he has a way of making sex look very unattractive and unsexy.
Very good. Thank you very much.